Got it. There are people who believe that Unitarian Universalists lack a moral core because many UUs do not profess a fear or love of an all-powerful God. Visitors are occasionally surprised to learn just how good Unitarians can be. We love our neighbors, we care for the planet, we try to be good people. And they might wonder how we come to that virtuous stance without a firm dogmatic structure of right and wrong. How many of you have heard that some UUs are better Christians than the real Christians? Real Christians in air quotes. We're not going to debate or celebrate that today. Today, I think we need to dig a bit deeper. What calls us to be good people? Are we called to be good? Are we good and virtuous? Are good and virtuous the same thing? How did we act virtuously during the pandemic, or did we? How do we envision the ways that Capital Unitarian will be when we return to in-person worship and our full church lives? So what is virtue? It's not a word we use very often. If we follow Aristotle's definition of the term, virtue is the highest good, implying more than just being who you're meant to be. Specifically, Aristotle was referring to eudaimonia, ancient Greek for well-being or happiness. The inference is that in order to reach true well-being and happiness, one must strive beyond basic goodness. With this in mind, I decided to examine the Unitarian Universalist principles to see how they fit within the concepts of virtue or greater good from centuries ago. It turns out that there are many, many different versions of the virtues, and I'm not going to go through them. You can look up virtues on Wikipedia or almost anywhere. Many of us have heard of the Christian virtues, chastity, humility, blah, blah, blah. It seems practical to compare our 7 Unitarian virtues with that Christian list, given that the latter are more familiar to most of us and not unfamiliar to Jews, Muslims, and atheists who live in Canadian society. But first, let me ask you this. Are the Unitarian principles intended for the congregation or for individuals? The preamble to the UU principle states, "We, the member congregations of the UUA, covenant to affirm and promote." After the principles and sources, there's a brief paragraph that reads like this: "Grateful for the religious pluralism which enriches and ennobles our faith, we are inspired to deepen our understanding and expand our vision. As free congregations, we enter into this covenant, promising to one another our mutual trust and support." None of the 2 statements say anything about individual belief or action. Both statements are about how congregations will act. One obvious question is, if you belong to an organization that has specific goals or beliefs, do you necessarily share those goals and beliefs? If I were to present you with a score sheet, and that's not coming today, that's another day. But if I was to present you with a score sheet listing the UU principles, would you be able to list actions that you have taken to live up to those ideals? I admit that there are grumpy days when it's hard for me to live a principled life. But for now, let's assume that the principles and sources are essentially true for Unitarian Universalist individuals, and that on our better days, we try to live them. Here's a reminder of the 7 Christian virtues. I like them because they call up images for me of peace, order, and good government. And they are hope or love, depending on who writes the list. Faith and wisdom, again, depending on who writes the list. Charity, fortitude, justice, prudence, and temperance. Hope and love are interchanged depending on the list of virtues that I found. In the Unitarian principles, hope seems to be an overarching theme, more so than love. The first UU principle states that we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This principle aligns well with the Christian principles of charity and justice. When we Unitarians talk about every person, we mean every human person of every age and ability. And we mean good and bad persons, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and atheist persons, persons who are newly born, and persons who are imminently dying, and persons who are happy and those who are sad. When we talk about inherent worth and dignity, we mean our belief that simply because we are human, our lives matter and we should be free. Of course, we say no to slavery and no to dehumanizing actions against any person. But we also affirm that any one of us humans carries the potential to do good. We celebrate the gifts of being human, our intelligence and capacity for observation and reason, our senses and ability to appreciate beauty, our creativity, our feelings and emotions. We cherish our bodies as well as our souls. We can use our gifts to offer love, to work for justice, to heal injury, to create pleasure for ourselves and for others. The Reverend Rebecca Parker writes that Unitarian Universalists affirm the inherent worth and dignity of each person as a given of faith, an unshakable conviction calling us to self-respect and respect for others. UU inherent worth and dignity reminds us to seek justice for ourselves and for others, and it calls us to treat other persons with charity. Just as Christian charity is a high virtue because it is an absolute requirement for happiness, Unitarians believe that if everyone treats everyone else with inherent worth and dignity, then all will be free to seek happiness. Our second principle says that we covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. In this case, virtue is right there in the affirmation, justice. We are asked to maintain an open mind, strive for kindness and fairness in all dealings with other people, and to help those who suffer. Justice needs compassion. Compassion is the response to the suffering of others that motivates a desire to help. Compassion motivates us to go out of our way to help physical, spiritual, or emotional hurts or pains of another. Compassion is often the key component in what manifests in the social context as altruism, and altruism can lead us to act for justice. I'm not going to go through all the principles, but let me do principle number 3 as well. We covenant to affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in congregations. Within this principle, the phrase acceptance of one another goes further than the first principle's call to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Unitarians accept the spiritual growth of our community even when it leads people to leave us, because often through their time in UUism, they feel that they have found a way that suits them better, a move away from congregational life altogether, or to the Quakers, or to a deeper embrace of paganism and witchcraft. We radically accept that we do not have to think alike to love alike, in the words of Francis David. There are other Unitarian principles, and I'd love to go through them one by one in a homily someday, and perhaps I will. For Unitarian Universalists, there remains some adherence to the original virtues, despite the fact that so much time has passed and most of us are no longer or never were Christian. We have likely dropped faith and replaced that virtue with reason. So are Unitarian Universalists a virtuous people? I believe an argument can certainly be made that the UU principles encourage us to move beyond subsisting in decency, pushing us to stretch out into the realm of better than good, the realm of virtue. So what virtuous actions happened during the global pandemic? I am so pleased to read this list. During the global pandemic in the last 16 months in Victoria, Capital Unitarian Universalist Congregation continued to pay its staff. This may seem like a little thing if it's not you being paid, but it's a big thing to people who are being paid and allows them to live in dignity. Capital Unitarian continued to hold weekly services, even though this is a profoundly difficult task. Zoom has allowed us to reach out to people across Canada and in the USA. This has kept our community together for the most part. Capital volunteers have continued sending birthday cards. This little action helps keep the congregation together. Before I list a few more virtuous Unitarian actions, I want to acknowledge that perhaps there are things we could have done to improve our adherence to the principles, but we likely will not know where those gaps are until we join together again. I think particularly of people who are separated from us by the digital divide, who don't have a laptop or high-speed internet. But more virtues. Capital's lay chaplains have continued within COVID rules to offer weddings and memorials and baby namings to Unitarians and non-Unitarians. Capital's board has decided to give to 3 charities this year. The pandemic has been devastating for a number of communities, and the board wished to support local programs for local people. Thus, a year's worth of our Capital Connect donations has been divided between Our Place Society to address the urgent needs of the homeless in our community, Inspire to support the Indigenous community, and the Victoria Rainbow Kitchen to address poverty and food scarcity. Capital members have participated in actions around reconciliation with First Nations through learning circles, movie nights, and discussions at the board. And finally, in this my short list of virtues, Capital honored our beloved Alistair Mont and Murray Enkin with Zoom celebrations of life. Although those things were hard, we recognize that life must go on, these rites of passage must go on, and we must do these things. The blurb for this service said, "What does it mean to be virtuous, and how does that goal manifest in our Unitarian Universalist principles?" Let's prepare for the post-pandemic year with 2020 vision about virtue. I think that in the coming year, and especially when we get back to face-to-face human live church, we can continue to accept each other and newcomers. We can learn about trauma that the pandemic may have caused and be open to helping folks negotiate with those effects. We can continue to work toward reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people, to navigate terms like settler and colonial, and to recognize the harm done by the residential school system. We can help immigrants and refugees for whom Canada is a haven of promise and safety. And while we're at it, let us continue to support and embrace our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning neighbors. And let us never forget the age-old but still vital need for virtuous people to struggle for peace, nuclear disarmament, pollution reduction, the safety of women and children from domestic abuse, and the need for all of us to have humane options when we face the end of our lives. There is so much work to do. I hope that this brief talk has encouraged you to think about virtue in your life and at Capital. How can we continue to be both a clubhouse for our members when we need community and a lighthouse for people who seek community and acceptance? Go now in peace.
Wow, Peter, thank you so much.